Hello and welcome back to another Growing with God video. Today we are going to answer a very interesting question, and that question is, does God condone racism? There are many people in this world who feel that God is in support of racism because of some of the things that they may see in the Bible, but this video aims to discuss whether this view of God is actually correct or not. So in order to do this, we're going to look at some things that actually make people think that God is racist. And one thing that makes people think this is, God's location-based judgment, if I were to put it that way. Because, there are certain places in the Bible where God had executed judgment on specific groups of people. Like, for example, God instructed King Saul to kill all the Amalekites, a specific people or ethnicity in 1 Samuel chapter 15 verses 1 to 3. But it is important to point out that in cases like these, God destroyed these people not because of their race or their ethnicity, but because of the acts that they did, which God did not like. For example, the Amalekites, which I mentioned, had taken advantage of some of the weaker Israelites during their journey to the Promised Land, and God was going to take his revenge for what they did. If we read 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 2, and that verse tells us, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. But this is not the only reason why people think that God has some kind of racial preference for specific people, because another reason why people think this is because the Israelites were sometimes segregated in certain ways. For example, people who were classified as Gentiles couldn't deal with the Israelites in the same way that, Israelites could deal with each other. For example, we see in Exodus chapter 29 verse 33 and Leviticus chapter 22 verse 10 that strangers could not dine with the Israelites or whoever God classified as a stranger. And plus, the Israelites were also outlawed from marrying people outside of their heritage as well, as we see in Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 3. But the reason why God didn't let them do things like this was not because God didn't like the other people, he just didn't like their race or whatever. It was because they simply weren't a part of the covenant with Abraham, and God needed to keep the culture in his land holy. Because if the Israelites had mixed with the Gentiles, who, by the way, had no idea of God's plan, they could stray away from the faith, and then the Israelites could serve Gentile gods, as it was said in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 4 to 6. So that was the concern. And this even happened many times throughout Israelite history as well, like we see in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 7 to 12, where kings like Jeroboam had led Israel to sin and made them commit idolatry. So it's also for this same reason that we in our time are also not advised to be friends with people who don't take God seriously in our time. Now, we don't have to do this based on race because times have changed, but we should just be careful about people who don't understand God's plan because they could lead us astray. As we see in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, which reads, Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? But one last thing that makes people sometimes think that God has racial preferences is the way that he always favored the Jews over other people. For example, God many times have given the Jews the right in the past to utterly destroy other people who, got in the way of the Israelites. If we read places like Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, where this was made very clear. These verses tell us, When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them, and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor shew mercy unto them. So, when most people read this just seems incredibly ruthless. And then people even use this to compare God to, some of those other wicked people in the past who did this exact same thing. But we should realize that racism is discrimination for someone's own selfish gains because a person just particularly doesn't like a group of people. This, by the way, is condemned in the Bible. But we should also remember by the side that God has every right to do what he feels with his own creation. And what we see in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 and 2 was simply to make sure that his people had a place in the land that he gave to them. It was not racism. Because the bottom line is God values all people. And all that he really cares about is the fact that we worship him. We are told in Acts chapter 10 verses 34 to 35 that God doesn't care about race. It says, "Of a truth I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him." So the bottom line is, if you are racist, then we should change our mindset because God is not racist. So the only thing we should be discriminating against are those who are righteous from those who aren't. But anyway, I can stop here on answering that question. Does God condone racism? Absolutely not. But anyway, if you have gained something from this video, I'd appreciate it if you like it, subscribe to the channel, and also to click the notification bell down below so you'll know when new videos are released. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.